essentially this is the start-finish line here, so the main straight goes down that way, pit area down there. Probably the big thing is this mound here disappears and turns into spectator mounds and things like that. And
it's basically another, this again, if not more, on the
on
other
top.
side towards where the drag strip will be.
Yeah, and that'll all, as I say, that'll all be flattened out.
Yep.
And yeah, so most of the track will actually be where that hill is. Where we are now will be a few rows into the spectator area, sort of coming into turn one.
They'll be adding a new gate down the bottom for transporters and.
That's an exit only.
Exit.
The main entrance for everyone is down that way,
Sure.
with an access road floating around here to get into the pit area,
Yep.
behind the stand. But yeah, the main car park for the crowd's just here, and the pit's in that direction.
What's up everyone, Toby here for the best episode yet of SprintcarHub. I wanted to follow up on my first video with some more information on the new Sydney International Speedway, and this week I was lucky enough to do just that. Tim Savell is the General Manager of Speedway Australia, and he reached out to me in response to hearing my thoughts on the new track. Tim suggested we meet up at the site of the new Speedway, so we did. I was able to chat with Tim and Speedway Australia Sport Development Officer Adam Brook for over 2 hours to discuss not only my video, but to find out as much information as I could for you. Check it out.
Essentially from day one, mainly because of the requirements of the New South Wales Motorsport Act, where we are one of 5 groups that are entrusted with looking after safety at all motorsport venues in New South Wales. So in terms of the fence and the operational side of things, yeah, we've had to be involved right from the start so that the government, in the most efficient time possible, build as good a speedway as they can. Yeah, well look, all that is identified in the documentation that you've probably had heaps of time to review in the last couple of weeks, but it details in there everyone who has been consulted with, and Speedway Australia is one of the groups. You mentioned the drags, all the various government agencies, so the Office of Sport, the Parklands Trust, who are the guardians of the land we're on now, and of course Sydney Metro, who are coordinating the whole deal on behalf of the government, and then the various stakeholder groups, venue operators, the drag venue operators, the other motorsport groups here, etc., have all had input in the preceding 10 months. Well, right back at the start, they said that Speedway would be at Eastern Creek. They did a whole load of analysis, which again is in the report, as to why they've settled on this particular spot here. We looked at other spots around Eastern Creek as they did, but they've detailed in the report the reasons why they've settled on here. There's no drainage issues, there's no issues with what's under the ground, because this was fill from the M7 that you can hear in the distance and things like that. So their aim was really to build a speedway quickly. They're not shying away from that they want the land where the current site is, and they want to get the speedway built as fast as possible. That means they need a site that they can actually get onto quickly and build in the time frames necessary. I think there's 3 or 4 sites all that way. We're down at the southern end of the complex, and there was a site outside of the precinct itself, over at the interchange. They all had their pluses and minuses, but at the end of the day it's their decision as to where they've put Speedway, and we have to make a good go of it now. Shouldn't I be asking you that question? Look, in reality, probably pretty much as you'd expect. There's been 10 months of not a whole lot of information coming out, and then there's a massive dump of it, 586 pages of it. So, it's only natural that there's going to be people who have read some of it, have read all of it, have read none of it, you know, are passionate about various aspects of Speedway or passionate about all of Speedway, all going to have their, you know, their input into the process, and that's the exciting thing about it is, you know, the government is going to get more ideas from listening to more people, so that's presumably why they have this consultation process, so they can make a bigger and better Speedway, and that's what they're aiming to do. Okay, so in terms of the design and well, specifically the design to start with, that's been in the hands of Sydney Metro. They've looked at the current site, they've looked at other sites, other motorsport complexes around the world, and settled on a design that fits this particular piece of land. In terms of the dimensions, it was decided really early, I think, that it would be the same on the pole line as Parramatta, because otherwise you could spend years arguing about how big it should or shouldn't be. You know, if we'd had a fresh piece of paper and more time, you know, would we still be arguing about whether it should be 460 or 480 or 400 or 700? Probably, because that's what Speedway people are like. So in terms of getting it done in time for the 21-22 season, certainly having the same dimensions with a bit more width was a really easy decision, I guess, for them to make. But ultimately, it's all Sydney Metro's decisions around that. The rest of us have input, whether that's other government departments or us or other stakeholders, but Metro are the ones who are building it and make those decisions. Well, I guess the feedback we've got is that the drags and Speedway can coexist happily elsewhere around Australia and are doing so. And you know, right back the very first press release that came out, the drag stated that they wanted to work with Speedway to make this venue as good as it could be, and they've been nothing but helpful in the intervening months. I think that's really something that, you know, from our experience, if the two motorsports are working together, there's no dust problem. If there's issues between them, then miraculously there seems to be a dust problem. So I guess our point of view was that as Speedway we want to be really good neighbours for the dragway and work with them and you know, use common sense, because let's be honest, if dust is a problem 50 metres that way, it's probably going to be a problem for the crowd as well.
And it's a pretty dusty site to start with, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, the location that we're in, there's a rubbish dump over there, you know, which isn't gardens and houses and things like that. That's bare dirt as well. Yeah. So there's plenty of natural stuff probably floating around in the sky that will sometimes land on the drag strip. I mean, I'm not an expert on all that kind of stuff, but I think I would obviously urge everyone to look at the documentation around how they've done all that, and it does say in there that that is all still subject to negotiation. There's no fixed particle limits that they've made a decision on, and they're going to shut down Speedway one race into opening night because there's too much dust. I think there's a common sense approach going to be taken there, but in reality that's a world-leading initiative that they're trying to implement, which would be beneficial for everybody if they can get it right. I think the key with that is they're building 7,000 permanent seating capacity, but there's potential to expand it. You know, and that's probably something that they didn't highlight in the original documentation release, but there's plenty of temporary seats around Eastern Creek that can be used to expand the capacity, and also if there is ultimately a Speedway GP here, then those seats can go onto the clay car track as well to boost that capacity. So 7,000 is more than adequate for 99% of the racing in Sydney. You would like to think that, you know, we'd need more, but let's be honest about where we've been in the last 10 years and accept that the government have used an evidence-based approach. They haven't worked on emotion. You know, we all know what it used to be like at Liverpool or the showgrounds or Newcastle. They don't. You know, we know where Speedway's come from and where we want it to go, whereas they're looking at an evidence-based approach around, they want the site that we're on currently, and they're going to replace it pretty much like for like, and so that's what they've decided on. Look, that's been part of the commitment since day one, essentially, and that's something that the likes of Motorcycling New South Wales are excited about, and for Speedway Australia side of things, vintage, karts, kids are all things that there's limitations at the current site that will be able to be catered for with a bike track, and we call it a bike track, but really it's a smaller car track as well, with a different surface. And that's part of the exciting initiative that the new site will enable us to get in there and do all those kind of things, as well as the current Speedway divisions that run at Parramatta. So in terms of the curfew, there was no specific piece of legislation for any of the sites here that require them to finish at 10:05 or 11 o'clock or anything like that. Common sense would dictate that you want to finish at a reasonable hour for your family entertainment, but in terms of if circumstances dictate, if there's a crash or if there's bad weather earlier in the night, those kind of things, the venue operator will be able to carry on, to the conclusion of the meeting. Well, look, it's not limited to 600. There's dedicated 600 spots for Speedway that's part of the lease arrangements, but the other 2,200 car parks that are just the other side of the road there will be able to be used, subject to agreement. And of course, if you're the dragway who is going to get them as part of their lease, well, of course you're going to want to offset your costs. It's in no one's interest if the car park over the back there's locked when there's a good Speedway crowd on, and there's people starting to clog the roads and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a bit of a red herring, that one. I think there's going to be no doubt that the dragway will be looking forward to working with the new operator and getting those kind of things resolved, because I'm sure there'll be times where they think they'll need the Speedway car parking too, when Speedway's not running, and I'm sure they'll be wanting to get their hands on the 600 parks that Speedway has, for when they've got their big events on, in the middle of winter and things like that. I think if you get onto this thing called Google and use your measurement tool and look at the size of the two pit areas, you'll see that this one is quite a bit larger. So I think your concerns there can be easily allayed, and I can say all I like about how much bigger it is, but if you want to find out for yourself and include it in your video, a little overlay, then go for it. They're saying it'll be ready early September next year. The two most recent builds in this part of the world took 7 and 8 months respectively, so at this point in time there's no reason to doubt what they're saying in that regard. Well, I think that's they've got a budget which they've allowed for, but that includes earthworks, it includes the car park over the back for the drags. It's out for tender at the moment, so in terms of what it finally costs, I guess the taxpayers of New South Wales will find out eventually, but it's certainly the biggest investment that any government has made in Speedway anywhere in the world, so for that we should be really grateful and also proud of. I would very much doubt it. It's a government thing. I mean, all of this that has unfolded over the last 10 months is by the book for the government. So, they're planning thousands of venues and operations across multiple industries all around the state, and they have a set of processes that they follow with all that. I can't imagine there's any process there that would involve, anyone outside of themselves actually going through the process and determining who's the best fit for this site. So I wouldn't expect that we are. It won't be till next year. Don't know exactly when, but according to them, they can't go out to tender on that side of things till the planning approvals and that are through, and that's because they need to know exactly what they're getting. So whoever's leasing the venue needs to know, and they need to be able to put it into documentation. You're getting exactly, this many seats and these corporate boxes and this big screen and this pit area and all that. And some of those things are still a few months away from being finalised, according to Metro. So it won't be till next year sometime, which then affects, the championships and the planning of race schedules and calendars for next year or the year after. It's not going to be perfect in year one, and it's going to take a bit of time to bed down, but that's how they do it. I mean, I think if you look at Bankwest Stadium last year when that was built, there was a bit of to and fro with Parramatta Eels and Western Sydney Wanderers right up to the last minute. There's a bit of brinkmanship around the lease and the catering and all that kind of thing. So, you know, I guess what we see and what they tell us do tend to marry up. So I don't think they're treating Speedway any different to, you know, any other venue that they then lease out to someone to operate. Well, I mean, it's not going to be perfect because nothing ever could be. But in terms of the opportunities for Speedway, there's probably more here than there was at the current site. And it's going to be new and modern and be able to operate more days of the week, you know, to do more development of Speedway. So that's, I guess, if you're looking at the whole of sport approach, in the long run, are we going to be better off if we can run more nights and run more different, you know, types of car and bike? You know, that's got to be a winner if you're looking at it from that perspective.